On to looking at the future of work. Michelle Acton is the Chief Customer Officer at Old Mutual Corporate. Michelle is going to be chairing this next panel. She's going to be taking a seat at the far end. Joining her, Lindiwe Sibesho, the Managing Director of REM Channel. Colin Smith, the Executive of Human Resources at Northam Platinum. And KG Bako, who's the Managing Executive of Talent Management and Transitions at ABSA Group. Thank you very much indeed. What a jacket, what a coat. Okay, that's the most dramatic coat we've had today. Thank you for bringing the most dramatic coat. It's very wintry, it's very nice, very good. Have fun.
Bruce, and sure, trying to unpack that conversation that Walter's hit us with in 30 minutes is going to be hard. But I think the theme here that I'm sure you're picking up is we did the first part of the session was very much focusing on more of the macro side of how we're transforming South Africans and working South Africans. But we want to shift it a bit more to the human side of managing employees as employers. I think a lot of what we discuss is around the employee benefits, but there's a lot more to that. So I think to start off with, interestingly enough, we did a survey recently and we asked CHROs what was the top thing that was keeping them up at night. And overwhelmingly, and not surprisingly coming through from Walter's presentation, is the rapid pace of change and the rapid need for skills to adapt and workforce management in that new arena. So I thought the best way to open with some HR executives sitting in front of me here is let's ask them the same question. So KG, let's start with you. What is keeping you up at night in your role as an HR executive?
Sure, thanks, Michelle. I think everything that we've listened in the past 30 minutes is exactly that. But if I can maybe share a couple of thoughts and a bit of context in terms of ABSA. We operate in 16 markets, mainly in Africa. And I was looking at some statistics that were shared by the UN around the population in Africa. And actually, 70% of the population is youth. And with what we've heard in the last 30 minutes, I mean, you can just imagine how we are thinking about the world of work going forward and the pace in which we need to actually reinvent ourselves as employers. Anything from, if you think about attracting talent, if you think about retaining talent, if you think about developing and actually even growth from an organization point of view, it is obviously introducing a new emerging trends that we need to think differently. If I can just think about what we had earlier around the pace in which the workplace is shifting, it's really around how when we think about the next talent coming into the organization, how they are already fluent. And then if you then look at what we have as a workforce today, these are individuals who are still grappling around AI and they're still trying to think about data security, governance, and the ethical use of AI, whereas the people are actually wanting to move and they're wanting to move with speed. So how do you then bring the organization to a level where it's ready to actually bring the two cohorts to work as one? So I think that's a challenge, and it's something that we're going to have to think differently as employers going forward.
Fantastic. Colin, from your side.
Sure, thanks, Michelle. The one thing, there are many that keep me awake, but the one that I think I'll put at the very top of my list is strategic workforce planning. As well as workforce management. And so why do I say that in terms of my context? So we've grown our company in 10 years, since 2014. We've gone from 9,000 people in 2014, and we currently have 23,000 people 10 years later. So that was a deliberate growth strategy that was put in place. And one of the key things that followed that growth strategy was people. And people are the ones that enable any strategy that gets put in place. Michelle. Just to give you an example of a statistic, in 2014, our annual wage bill, what we paid annually, we now pay in a quarter. So that just gives you a sense of how much the workforce has grown. And so I think for retirement, it just indicates how much is going into retirement plans, into retirement savings. So a huge amount of money has moved into that sector. The other thing is that we operate in geographically dispersed areas, in non-urban locations. And so if I look at these areas, I would also say that some of the critical things that keep me awake, besides the workforce planning, is the attraction of skills, the building of skills in very rural areas. You know, you take someone who has got a matric, for instance, who is at home, and you need to train this person on how to operate a 5 million rand piece of equipment. So training individuals up in these rural areas, being able to retain them because of competition. We're not the only people that are operating in that area. So talent management, the attraction, the retention of skills is something that's quite important, Michelle. And just lastly, from an HR point of view and looking at the business, taking a strategic view on how you plan for your short-term positions. This is more your operators and your guys who are on the ground. Your medium-term positions, which is artisans, and then your longer-term positions, which is your engineers and your geologists. So I think workforce planning for me just encompasses and surrounds all of that.
Thank you. Sure. So let's start the conversation with AI and technology. And I think Walter unpacked around his main dividends around AI technology being around the exponential growth, exponential productivity, and exponential experience. And one of the areas he mentioned within South African context is this challenge of, or the perceived challenge around the exponential productivity and how that's seen as taking jobs away in a country where we need jobs. So I think KG, where are you seeing the biggest impact with AI and technology on your employees in your space?
Look, I think being in the banking industry or financial services, you gotta have to think ahead. And we were forced when the fintechs were starting to enter the market in terms of leveraging technology to, looking at that as a potential revenue option. And as banks, I think we started thinking about how do we digitize ourselves? How do we leverage technology to to improve the experience of customers, as an example. And there was a lot of focus on that. We actually invested a lot in terms of making sure that we get rid of legacy platforms to increase the positive experience of our customers. In fact, I learned this from yesterday as we were engaging Walter, that it's actually business modernization, not necessarily digital transformation. And that's what we focused on. But what we realized was, as we were focusing more on the customer, we're actually leaving our employees behind. The digital transformation was very much to ensure that we can monetize using our platforms. But we realized that our employees were left behind, and we took a concerted effort to actually start building some skills around our employees so that when they show up, as we automate, we can also redeploy them and future-proof them to actually do other meaningful work. And I was chatting to somebody yesterday that we are looking into having an AI academy that we're going to put in place to accelerate the digital fluency. We've already started doing some audit testing just to see the level of proficiency and fluency in our workforce. And it became very clear. It actually aligns to what we had earlier in terms of, the young generation are very much ahead of us. They're already upskilling themselves. They don't wait for organizations to actually do that. So by the time we actually get to them, you can actually see the level of fluency is higher than your older generation, and more so in the C-suite, because we kind of think that it's actually, the problem is sitting down there. So we are looking at leveraging the academy to actually accelerate that, and we have noticed already that there's different levels of fluency, so you obviously cannot have a one-size-fits-all. We are looking at ways that we can actually bring in the whole organization into the journey and accelerate our efforts in terms of making sure that as we are showing up externally to our customers, our employees can also have that level of confidence in that.
Thank you. And I think that's a great point you raised around the need to not only look at outwards around how are you digitizing for your customers, but inwardly, how are you making sure your staff are ready for this change as well in the skills. And I can imagine that is in the financial services space, but if we shift to in the mining space and that exponential productivity element, Colin, how are you experiencing it? Are you finding that, similar to what Walter was mentioning, it's enhancing jobs, or are you actually finding it is reducing jobs?
So it's definitely not reducing jobs. There's definitely a wave of AI that's coming and is going to hit us like everyone else. But we believe that, we need to take people first on this journey. It needs to be a people first journey. And the technology needs to come after people. We need to skill up individuals. So first of all, we're going to focus on what is actually going to change in individuals' positions in their jobs. Once we've identified that, we can then put the necessary developments in place to deal with the progression of technology, to deal with the AI. Mechanization is a big issue for us, Michelle. And although mechanization is still very manual, someone needs to get into a machine and operate a drill rig. The people who maintain that machinery, that's where the AI is going to come in to our business. So let's take someone who is a mechanic or a fitter. What he can now do, Michelle, through technology is he can apply predictive data to ensure that breakdowns on machines are not as long as they were, to ensure that he can predict the times at which machines need to be serviced. If you look at another example in the mining industry, you take blasting as an example. So there are now AI tools that can assist with where you put the explosives to ensure that you get the maximum benefit of a particular blast. The AI assists with how the rock is fragmented. Now, all of that happens, but the individuals who work underground, they're still there. Their jobs haven't gone away. So definitely, it's coming. It's a wave that's going to hit us. We're taking a people-first approach. We'll take it from there, Michelle. Thank you.
Fantastic. And I think a key theme is around the skills element. And I think Walter scares me because my CV's just got very short of how quickly your experience no longer matters. But let's shift the conversation now around the whole benefits and flexibility and where we are with that. I think we're shifting into a world where people are expecting more personalization, they're expecting more flexibility. What was interesting in the survey we conducted recently when we asked people about what benefits they valued most, there was the core ones, which was retirement fund, medical aid, and then it came down to financial incentives. But then there was a big thing around flexibility and the need for flexibility and people wanting to have the ability to flex. So I think there's a very paternalistic way that South African companies have often provided benefits for their staff. I need to make sure you've got all these benefits so you're okay. So you've got this demand for greater flexibility, but this need to be slightly more paternalistic. So Lindiwe, let's bring you into the conversation, and let's have a deep dive on what do we mean by flexibility and choice when it comes to benefits.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michelle. And it's great to have had KG and Colin actually represent the human capital community. I mean, we, from a REM channel perspective, work with them in supporting all the things that keep them up at night in terms of the strategic workforce planning, but also the evolution that we are seeing, as what Walter was sharing around how the skills that they need to attract actually also come with expectations, to your point, around how they will be remunerated. So that also needs to evolve. So what we have seen and have been having discussions with them as we support is this need, because obviously AI also means that employees can be exposed and use it to actually inform what they need throughout their different life stages, but also work stages. So what the flexibility that we're seeing is really structuring your total remuneration package offering, which is a very key element of the employee value proposition they need to attract, engage, and retain those skills and drive the P, the productivity that Walter was talking about, is allowing employees within a guided framework to actually make choices. Choice has actually become a very key part of the value proposition. Make choices, but that are supported by the right literacy, supported by a balance between helping employees meet their current needs. We're all struggling from a financial pressure perspective without compromising that long-term security. So that's what the flexibility is. And it obviously talks to the different generations, but to the earlier point, without necessarily assuming, but rather engaging employees so that you do understand what they need and provide that framework where they can have that choice.
And I suppose in a part of an employer's role, and I believe a key role for an employer, is around enabling the right benefits. And when we speak to members, they often believe, well, my employer needs to help me with this, and my employer needs to help me with that to make sure that I'm in place. So how do you manage in this world of wanting more? And KG, I'm directing this to you. But in a world where people want more. They want more out of their salary. They want more take-home pay. They want all of that balance around being a responsible employer. In an environment where there's actually a cost of living crisis on top of this. So people want more benefits, they want more take-home pay, and so they'd like the employer to pay it all, but of course there's like that whole income minus expenses equal profit balancing act. Yeah. KG, give us some examples of how you experiencing and handling that within your environment.
Yeah, look, I think it's tough. I mean, we can't deny the fact that our competitors are no longer like for like. Right, we are seeing a blend of you either competing with your local employers, global employers, multi-industries. Actually, when Lindiwe spoke about choice, that applies to everybody, right? People have choices. So as an employer, you have to really think beyond the norm. You're going to have to be more creative. The innovation that we spoke to earlier comes in handy. When I spoke about Africa being, 70% being youth of the population, we're also competing with global employers, and technology also come into play because it doesn't matter where you work in the world, right? And especially those developed economies where they're also having challenges around the aging workforce. So they're coming into Africa and they're coming with a big checkbook, right? So you do need to make sure that when you think about benefits, you think beyond the traditional ways of actually offering an employee. You have to think about it from a value proposition perspective. So we look at it from a talent in terms of the different talent segments. You cannot have a one-size-fits-all. You're going to have to understand your workforce, and that's where data and insights come in. And we are actually leveraging AI again to also help us to really gather the data that we can use to make those decisions. It becomes very helpful because when you understand a particular talent segment, you are able to come up with something that is actually targeted for that. We have different, family structures. We have different, people come from different backgrounds, so they all have different needs. Obviously, you have to have some sort of a framework that you can operate within, making sure that you still have the minimum, but you give people choices. But you also give them choices that actually align to where they're at in terms of their life cycle. If you've got a single mother, who's got a little baby, you understand what their needs are versus somebody who's in their late 50s who already have kids that are grown out of the house, and then you come up with bespoke benefits that will actually speak to them. And in that way, you are able to retain and actually keep them engaged in the organization.
Fantastic. So let's have a shift onto a really hot topic, and that's around retirement age. I suppose we've seen the numbers, so from member outcomes, retirement outcomes, the later people work, the better it is in terms of improving. We heard from Paul around the retirement age of 67 being thrown around in Australia. And also around Volta raising the fact that the fastest growing cohort of employees is the 65 plus. I think the other angle of that with retirement age is it's also seen as an angle where if you let people work longer, you're delaying bringing new younger people into the workforce. But then, of course, there is the whole upskilling, sharing of knowledge element which comes through. So, Colin, I'd love to hear some of your insights of how you've managed the retirement age challenge in trying to bring through for your employees around what the right retirement age should be.
Sure. It's very important to have a good generational mix in any organization. What we've done is our retirement age around 5 years ago was sitting at 60. And in the 5-year period, we have twice shifted our retirement age. We first went from 60 to 63. And, we looked at the numbers, we did some analysis, and we decided to take it from 63 to 65. So it's a 5-year extension in someone's work life. Interestingly, not everyone is taking up the opportunity to work till 65. You would think that people would grab this opportunity. So what it does do, you mentioned the youth, is individuals who are not taking up that opportunity. It creates opportunities for us to bring in a younger workforce. It creates opportunities for us to bring in youth. You also mentioned the transfer of skills. Retaining skills also gives us that opportunity to transfer, and in our industry, specifically safety-specific skills that is absolutely key to what it is we do. We have turnover like any organization, and what that does is it assists us with renewing the skills or renewing the individuals in the organization, as well as bringing in a particular set of skills that they come with, Michelle. So retirement age, we've shifted it out twice, and we are seeing the value of it, but it's something that you need to keep on exploring. I don't see us shifting it any further because we operate in a very physical environment, and age definitely impacts on your ability to do certain physical tasks, but your knowledge, your ability to impart safety skills is what's important with the older generation and keeping them on board.
So in some ways, pushing out your retirement age brings in a new element of flexibility, because you then have greater flexibility of when you want to retire later, or you can still leave earlier if you prefer. I suppose when there talks about this flexibility, it comes with huge support. I mean, when we speak to people about their options as an employee of a company, I think one of the big key things comes with my employer must help me. Like, they need to give me the support, the options, the choice. So I want flexibility, but I want to get support around how to use that flexibility. Lindy, can you unpack this a bit around what do you think employers can use to get this balance right?
I think this is where we partner with employers, because we've got to make sure that we understand where employees are at. Yes, they want flexibility, but they also need financial literacy. So the guardrails that need to be put in place, and I mean, in this book you would have seen, hopefully when you go home, it's an amazing publication we've got at the back, Talent Vantage, which is really how you work with your employees to try and balance that. Colin and KG both said using analytics and understanding, because I mean, HR uses great data right now, understanding where people are, means that you can use that to actually structure your offering in terms of your REM and benefits to such an extent that it enables employees to make the right choices. And it's always just about the balance. It's always just making sure that you are responsible as an employer whilst creating the diverse needs, packages that people need. There is also quite a lot of regulation in South Africa. I know we always talk about this. We don't lack regulation. We sometimes just aren't able to consistently enforce. So for instance, pay equity and pay transparency is coming. So that will look at how employers are actually enabling employees within the right structures to make the right decisions, but not only looking at pay, looking at the benefits, and not only focusing at executives, but looking at all levels of employees, because ultimately we have to make sure that every employee is paid in a way that is fair and allows them to participate effectively in the economy. So there's quite a lot that we can partner, and human capital actually partners with organizations to help people make the right choices.
And I'm glad you raised regulation. So just in the interests of time, before they throw us off the stage, I just want to ask just a question to both KG and Colin around the legislation. I mean, one of the things that was quite scary, which Walter put up, was around the world of change. The definition of a job is going to change. People with multiple jobs, what do we call them? Polyjobbers. There's lots of frames of lots of different. Our current legislative framework, what changes do you think need to be coming to better support where we are going in terms of this new way of work, whether it's bringing in AI, upskilling, changing of skills, a lot of shorter, multiple jobs? What are some thoughts around what we need from a regulatory perspective to try and make it a more worker, like a friendlier environment as we move forward?
Michelle, I think there needs to be a concerted effort amongst all role players. I think we all need to get into one room and actually talk about this, whether it's your policymakers or it's the private sector or even institutions like learning. We all need to start from there and being intentional in terms of the curriculum that actually goes into universities, as an example, so that you can prepare our people to get into the workplace, having something tangible that they know that it's going to be actually relevant, right? We as a private sector, we also need to provide that input in terms of where we see the market going. And I think the policymakers also need to come into play in terms of being intentional around how we actually shift the look and feel of our policies going forward.
Colin, some thoughts from yourself?
With us, we operate in a highly unionized environment. So besides the legislation, there are collective agreements, there are recognition agreements that need to be taken into account. We don't have a lack of legislation in South Africa, and one of the key things is that labor legislation is not moving at the same pace as what technological advancements are moving. And you definitely need for policymakers to really get on board. Let's use an example of these individuals who are polyhopping or gigging. What is it that you can do to ensure that there's a smooth transfer of retirement benefits from one job to the next job to the next job, so you don't end up with someone encashing their retirement benefits every time they leave? And then they start from the beginning, because honestly, our employees are also not disciplined enough to ensure that they continue that saving. A lot of them, and we've seen it actually encash their retirement benefits, and it leaves them having to start from scratch.
I know they want us to sum up, but I was really encouraged by Astrid earlier when she spoke about benefits portability. I think that's one thing that we need to look at as an industry, and it was quite good to hear that it doesn't require, legislation. It actually just requires will. So if we can think about how do we enable that flexibility and choice, but really structure around the member as opposed to around the employer, that could potentially encourage the savings that we want to see members have ultimately when they retire.
And I think that's always one of the challenges in an industry such like ours. A job has always been defined as an 8 to 5, same employer, and you just change employers, but the world's moving on. So it's going to be very interesting to see how we need to be looking at things different. I mean, it's the same with skills. You employ somebody now for a skill you need in 3 years, you're not going to need that skill anymore. And so how do you either ability to upskill or easier bring in the new skill that you need for that? So I think it's going to be a very interesting time. No one said it was going to be easy. And I always think that the role in the HR space is probably the hardest, because with all of these factors we're talking about, it's people we're managing, it's people we're leading. And I look forward to some of these things being unpacked. Bruce, no pressure in your panel later when we talk about the leadership elements and what's needed. But shall we move on to the Q&A?
Your questions, please. Thank you. Yes, I think they should be rewarded. It's not much of a reward, but it is, it's a reward nevertheless. So, Walter, what is a job?
What is a job?
Yeah. The Stats SA will tell you a job is a particular thing. Capitec will tell you a job can be many things. Unemployment rate in South Africa is, in fact, not over 40%, or today's official stats, which showed an increase in unemployment of 0.3% to 32.3%. Actually, unemployment is close to 10% because people are actively engaged on the platforms. Does a 60-60 rider have a job, an Uber driver have a job?
So, I mean, I'm not going to give you the perfect definition of a job, but how I see it, it's what you do in trade of your skills. So it's a job probably is that trading of a skill or something that I've a lot of time in return for remuneration, and hopefully it's predictable and repeats many times, monthly, annually, forever.
So we measure jobs in the wrong way then?
Well, it depends on the conversation you want to have. I mean, that's the
broadly
debate.
speaking, we
perhaps.
underestimate the true value of the South African economy. We underestimate the true buying power of households. We underestimate the potential of financial inclusion.
Agreed.
Because we rely on official data rather than intelligence.
Agreed.
So how do we fix this then? Because I'm going to have a rather interesting conversation in a couple of minutes' time. Because we've got Zingiswa Losi, who is the head of COSATU. And she's going to disagree with all of you, who've all nodded. And I've incriminated all of you. So how do we start getting better data then? I'm sure APSA could help us on that one.
I'm starting to see a new behavior coming into the industry. We all have the same problems. We all have the same challenges.
And goals and aspirations and hopes and wishes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So, but I'm starting to see banks, as example, having the appetite to actually engage. It's no longer about competition. It's about let's get together, let's understand what are you experiencing, what are your issues, how are you responding to that. And that is not just limited to one industry. I'm actually starting to see more industries actually wanting to engage. And I think the more we do that, then we can bring in other participants from other stakeholders. Then we can have more of a holistic, collective conversation and actually start looking at how we can actually skin the cat slowly, surely.
You know, it's pointless having a bus unless you're going to throw people under it, so let me throw you under the bus. Capitec has a data set, and I'm willing to bet that on the day Business Day carried that article about real unemployment is 10%, somebody in APSA went, let's check what our banking profile tells us. What number did you come up with? Okay, who's more accurate, Capitec or Stats South Africa, in terms of Walter's definition of what a job is?
Capitec.
Capitec, obviously.
Thank you. Okay, now that's what we need.
And we're learning from them anyway.
No, completely.
Yeah.
No, but it's about economic activity, seeing the flow of money. It's real life, real time data in terms of what's going on. I'm fascinated, Walter, also by the role of AI. And there was a guy called Dan Brickhill, for whom we should all hate Dan Brickhill, because he invented the spreadsheet. The spreadsheets have been a massive liberator, of course, but they've also made us all, I'm willing to bet, there's control freaks in the room who love spreadsheets. But he didn't want to release the earlier spreadsheet because he thought he'd put accountants out of business.
Yeah.
And in the same way, and I'm wondering, and it's a naive hope on my part, that I veer to your sense of optimism and hopefulness on the use of AI test cases, that just as Dan Brickhill was apprehensive about the spreadsheet being released and putting accountants out of work, the opposite proved to be true. The opposite of our worst fears, the Terminator scenario, is actually a less likely 10-year idea.
So again, when we have these conversations around, and I see there's a question that's come up, what happens when the cost of production becomes zero? Or when, you've got the spreadsheet, does it eliminate the accountant? If you isolate it to an N of 1, that specific scenario, and you assume that the accountant is only going to do what they were doing before the technology, then yes, it does eliminate jobs and it eliminates relevance, etc. But that's not how it works. What we do is we uplift productivity. So imagine we produce stuff and it gets cheaper and cheaper to produce. It doesn't mean we make less. It means that we can sell it to more people. We bring more people onto our product. So there's this expansion, an economic expansion driven by productivity. So we might not do things, we won't do things the same, but the relevance of that the accountant gets a lot more done today than what they did before. I think the one challenge we do find that we will have is there's this misnomer that the opposite of this conversation, which says that if I use these technologies, then we're going to have a lot of free time, we're going to walk our dogs, and we're going to pay attention to flowers and get time to really, really enjoy the stuff we don't get time to. I think the exact opposite happens. I think we're going to be squeezed more and more for productivity because we've got tools that eke out monstrous efficiency in our day. So we'll move more towards this time-plosion scenario where we try and do more and more with the time that we've got. We'll have more expectations on us because we now have the tool to help us do more, better. That is, I think, a conversation that we should be having.
Now, please don't take this the wrong way, because many of you will remember a magazine called Scope. Well, in 1970, Scope was a serious news magazine, believe it or not. And a friend of mine was given a copy of the Scope from his birth date in 1970 by his grandmother. That's how wholesome Scope was. And it made predictions about the year 2000.
Oh, wow.
In the year 2000, we will all have more leisure time. Computers will do all of the work. Robots will clean our homes and do our cooking and do our shopping. We will have all of this free time. I think it's been proven to be inaccurate in the fullness of time. And maybe AI, that forecast on AI may be inaccurate too, potentially.
Potentially.
One of the questions is, what is the future of social grants? And what role, Michelle, could the industry play in the dissemination of social grants? And I'm interested in this because I was talking to the CEO of a fintech the other day who is making the very bold forecast that governments are all, over time, going to be paying quite substantial, these productivity gains that Walter talks about, quite substantial grants to people to enjoy the leisure time that Walter talks about. Do you see a role of social grants, this industry, playing a part in the administration, distribution, management of a system like that in a perfect AI future?
So I think I'd hate to have the concept that we have more people on social grants. I think part of the reason is us having this conversation.
No, but it's a worldwide phenomenon. It's a worldwide phenomenon where countries will be obliged to support people because they may not have jobs as we understand them today.
But I do believe, and I think it comes back to the conversation that was held earlier around Astrid talking about digitization. And I think if you do fast forward in a world where we enable that digitalization, we build all the right pipes in the right place. I mean, Paul used the example of MyGov, where you can go online and see all elements of all your pictures coming together. I don't see why even the payment of grants cannot be in a very different form to how we see it now. I think at the moment it's seen very much like the social grant systems over there administered by one group and your pension providers over there administered by another group. But as we fast forward, I absolutely think that as we get more efficient and we start thinking differently, I think there's no doubt that with the right focus, as always, that I think it almost becomes a seamless element.
Lindy, well, a second last thought to you on this. What skills, structures, and culture will best prepare organizations for what is inevitable change and disruption, comfortable or uncomfortable disruption? What are the skills, structures, and culture that organizations will need?
Sure, it's a very,
it's a
very big question. I think from a skills perspective, it's the adaptability, the ongoing learning. When it comes to AI, and I think KG mentioned it, it's the ethical use of AI, because there's obviously that part as well that we didn't unpack. It's from a structures perspective, it's probably making sure that there is flexibility, but with due guardrails, so that the HR executives can still plan. They can know how much will be their payroll. They will be able to predict costs. They know what skills they need. And you asked a question earlier around define a job. Actually, I don't think there's jobs anymore. There are skills that are required to execute on strategies, grow the economy. So in my space, we're seeing more and more skills-based pay as opposed to job grades and job-based pay, because people, to the point that we've been making, are actually selling their skills into the organization. So the structures need to be flexible enough to create that. And I think from a culture perspective, it is, I liked the point that Walter made earlier around leadership fluency and making sure that we actually exemplify this change and adaptation and learning and so on from the top, so that the people who are leading and setting strategy are themselves informed around what is happening in the future. And they set the culture anyway. So you've got to have that kind of environment where people are enabled, but they are also led by exemplary leaders themselves who don't think it's everyone else that needs to do it and not do it themselves.
And if I can add, so one point there just made me think that in a world of AI and modernization, in the old days, you couldn't have like complex payroll structures and complex benefit structures because your payroll systems couldn't cope with them. Mm-hmm. Someone had to sit and type into the payroll system of how much they were going to pay and what the deductions. So let's just keep the number of
variables,
variations. Thank you. Small, but actually, there's no reason why we can't completely personalize in some ways, because the systems enable. We have got that capability we haven't had before,
and when
which
you
I
had
think
10,000
opens the
people
world.
before and only 10 now, it's so much easier. Anyway, slightly facetious. Before he went mad, Elon Musk would make occasional good points. And the one I do remember is that in the future, you will be paid directly in proportion to the level of problems you solve. Yeah. And I think that's as pertinent to the skills economy. I remember, and it's possibly, Colin, a decade ago, some miners in Australia got fired because they were videoed dancing underground because they had so much spare time because machines were doing all of the work there. You suggest that Northern is quite safe from a jobs perspective because you still need people to do the physical work. I wonder if we are not going to see quite a rapid disruption in mining in the same way as mechanization has been one vast disruption that we haven't experienced to the same extent, but AI able to mine deeper as the gold price over $3,000 an ounce makes resources more accessible, for example. Is that a feasibility?
So in mining, what's absolutely critical is that the ore body determines your mining method, whether it's narrow, tabular, deep underground, or if it's mechanized, where you can actually get machines going through. So we could possibly get to a stage where we actually do that, Bruce. we know that there is gold 4 kilometers underground. There are plenty of minerals underground. It's just how we access them. The geologists have looked at it, and they've told us what's there. It's being able to access that.
But won't it be wonderful to access resources that are inaccessible by humans because we've got mechanization and intelligence that can do it and not sweat? Which would
So
be nice.
I've seen something, it's been around for a couple of years now, where there's a startup in the USA that are looking at mining meteors.
Oh, yeah.
So,
good luck.
You know, yes, good luck.
Maybe that's one of Elon's projects. Wish you luck with it. Panel, thank you very much. Please, will you thank them with rapturous applause. Also, thank you.